My name is Katherine Conroy, and I do lead our data insights development at RDC. In the past, we've covered topics such as wildlife trafficking, as well as human trafficking and other organized criminal risks. But we really hadn't covered an overview of organized crime, so that's what we're going to do today. And what we did for this analysis is we looked at the lexicon of organized crime, specific risk jurisdictions, as well as some supply chain analysis. And this is all in an effort to identify organized criminal networks, which have become increasingly difficult to detect as they've shifted from being more territorial based to being more flexible and spanning across the globe. So welcome to El Chapo, Frank Costello, and Al Capone, financial crime CEOs. And if you're not familiar with our methodology yet, at RDC we have a global risk information database. It has 20 years of over 20 years of adverse media, sanctions, watch lists, and PEPs. And we categorize these events by risk. So today we're going to be focusing on our organized crime code, which is defined as criminal association, racketeering, RICO, enterprise corruption, gangsterism, gang-related crimes and violence, and street terrorism, committed on a large scale and usually featuring a hierarchical organization. And that's akin to, say, a legitimate organization such as having a CEO, but instead they have a kingpin or a mob boss or a drug lord depending on their business endeavors. We're also going to look across our codes at different organized criminal groups and see what business endeavors their CEO counterparts are taking part in. So looking at our organized crime code globally, some of the top countries we have are the United States, India, Italy, the United Kingdom, and Mexico. And one of the questions that came up in doing this study was what really makes a criminal organization different from a legitimate organization? So legitimate organizations use words like LLC, Corp, Inc., or SA. Meanwhile, criminal organizations are donned mafia, cartel, gang, or racket. But as we said, they feature a hierarchical organization similar to that of a legitimate organization. And they might also be just as involved, if not more so, in community politics than legitimate organizations are. And we have plenty of organizations in our risk information database that feature risks and are charged for things like money laundering and fraud and murder. So kind of look at how are those different from regular organizations, or how are they similar? And a lot of this comes just within the lexicon. So we took a couple of these keywords, gang, mafia, cartel, and racket, and saw how they spanned across some of these top org code countries. So two that really stand out is that in Italy, mafia is the most prominent term, and that's across all different countries. We also find that the Italian mafia, though, has roots within the US, but the term mafia within the United States can also be associated with the Mexican mafia or the Chinese mafia. And we actually find that Mexican mafia, in quotes, or La Mafia Mexicana, are much more commonly used within the United States than the term mafia is used within the entire country of Mexico in general when we talk about organized crime. Inversely, within Mexico, we see that cartel is the most prominently used term, but we also find that cartel is used within Italy as well, but in Italy it might refer to a totally different subset of organizations. So in Italy, we see that there's a mafia of a heroin supply chain between Italy, India, and Albania. And even further to that, even though we have this term for cartel that relates to an Indian supply chain, we never see the word cartel within Indian reports. So that just gives you a little overview of the lexicon that we looked at within our org code. All right, so now we're going to break down a little bit about how these keywords work and looking at them across different risks. So first, looking at mafia, as I mentioned, mafia is the most common keyword we see in Italy. And when we look at Italy, on the right, you get a little bit more of a breakdown of how these are concentrated. So in central and southern Italy, we really do see a higher concentration of mafia activity And this does correspond with certain groups that we're already aware of, such as the Sicilian Mafia, as well as the superordinate criminal organization, the Ndrangheta, and I'm sorry if I butchered that pronunciation. But as we can see with cases like the Ndrangheta, we know that family is a really important part of Italian mafias. Within the Ndrangheta, you're part of it just by being born into it. And within our events, we see that over 20% of Italian mafia events are related to family. So they might mention a brother, an uncle, a father, a husband, etc. And we know that these family ties have really allowed people within the Italian mafia to infiltrate legitimate businesses. Another thing is that we also see that familial migration has allowed certain Italian mafia members to really spread across the globe. And when we do look across the globe at the different risks associated with mafia groups, there's not anything too unexpected initially. You see theft, drug trafficking, murder, fraud, money laundering, arms trafficking, bribery, assault, and smuggling. But something that might be a little bit outside of the Godfather wheelhouse is environmental crimes. But we do see, say, with the Ndrangheta group, that they've been able to infiltrate greenhouse production, as well as renewable energy sectors. And we see throughout the world that environmental crimes such as poaching, mining crimes, as well as trafficking of toxic waste, sand, or diamonds are all associated with different mafia groups worldwide. All right, our next keyword is gang. And we saw that the highest concentration of gang reports were in the UK, and this was most associated with drug trafficking. But in contrast to drug trafficking in the UK, in the United States, gang activity is a lot more associated with arms trafficking and murder. So this speaks a little bit to different types of risks we might see. It also might correlate with different legal systems or different cultural aspects. Then when we look at the racket keyword, we see that this is most common in India. And again, we see a lot of similar types of activities like fraud, drug trafficking, human trafficking. India is one that we have had some different reports on with human trafficking, as well as smuggling in terms of wildlife trafficking, especially because they are a source for such endangered and rare species. But one that's a little bit less common that we see is counterfeiting. And counterfeiting is an important risk to consider because it is usually a predicate crime to other types of crimes. So it might be counterfeiting documents in order to smuggle wildlife or smuggle people to different areas. So that's an important risk to look out for. Now for cartel, we did a little bit of a case study in Mexico since that was the area where cartel was most prevalent. Other countries associated with the term cartel are the US, Russia, Brazil, and Colombia. So we decided to look at the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico, which was led by Juan El Chapo Guzman, former leader and fugitive. And El Chapo is known for being a businessman with the way he ran his organization. So he does have some risks that are a little bit more violent and maybe are more of a side effect of organized activity, such as murder, kidnapping, even being a sanctions connect. But some of these other risk activities do speak to their business operations. So mainly the Sinaloa cartel was a drug trafficking organization, but domestic cartel wars increased the demand for certain resources. So in order to garner more revenue, the Sinaloa cartel did expand into different types of organized crimes such as arms trafficking, human trafficking, even assassinations. And something special about the Sinaloa cartel that really speaks to how cross-border enforcement is an issue with organized crime is that the Sinaloa state in Mexico is a mining region. So the Sinaloa cartel was able to appropriate the mines of that region so that they could transport drugs underground, usually moving from Colombia through Guatemala, through Mexico into the United States. And we can see that that corresponds here with our top countries associated with El Chapo and the Sinaloa cartel, going from Mexico to the US to Colombia, Guatemala, and even sometimes up to Canada if making it through the US. And this just sort of breaks down that a little bit clearer in case you wanted to see sort of the risks. On the left, those larger, darker crimes are much more associated with El Chapo and Sinaloa cartel. And you also get a little map breakdown on the right. Some other crimes that we see are perjury, drug possession, assault. These are all different types of crimes that are also associated with these groups. Now, going forward in identifying organized crime, there are a few different emerging areas of concern for 2020, and this includes cybercrime, identity fraud, as Sabrina alluded to, fraudulent medicine is a major concern, especially in the wake of coronavirus. But we also see a lot of concerns over environmental crime, human trafficking, and piracy. So this chart here breaks down cybercrime rates corresponding with organized crime throughout the world, just from 2019 through 2020. And we notice that India is a high-risk jurisdiction. We also see the US is high risk, and Nigeria definitely comes through for a lot of cybercrime reports. But something important to notice with cybercrime, especially, and with some of these other emerging areas, is there's not yet super strong legal frameworks in some jurisdictions, or there's also a lack of monitoring available. So a chart like this in this instance might not necessarily refer to the highest risk jurisdictions, but it does speak to some of the areas that already have legal frameworks in place to capture these risks. Notably, some places that might be risky that aren't on this chart are like Venezuela or North Korea, and reasons we might not have those is because there's a lot less reporter freedom or journalistic freedom, so we don't get to hear always as much about these different types of risks that are emerging. All right. So in sum, our goal is to improve the financial system so that we can keep criminals out of this system and identify these large, expansive networks that are running across the world using new technologies, etc. And ways to do this is by understanding the lexicon of organized crime. What's the lexicon within legal jargon? What's the lexicon within media? How does that change based on different perspectives from different countries? And how can we use these to understand different supply chains? And second major point is that collaboration is key to this cross-border enforcement. So financial institutions as well as prosecutors need to keep in communication because there's not one singular framework working to combat these types of organized criminals. And because they are so expansive, they're able to continue laundering funds. So it's important that we collaborate across borders to keep laundered funds out of the financial system.